In our previous episode, we saw Jacob. He was making his way back to the old land, making the way to the land that Isaac had, the land that Abraham had, making his way back to the promised land. And so he sends messengers once he gets there. And the messengers come back, and his brother Esau is sending in the troops. He's sending in the Metilla. And then we saw Jacob wrestling with God and then getting crippled and getting a new name. He is now Israel. But his brother's still on the way, so what's going to happen next? Genesis 33:1. And Jacob raised his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and with 400 men. So he divided the children to Leah and to Rachel and to the two maids. So here we go. Finally the encounter, the one that has been put off for a very long time. Many years have gone by, and by the look of the troops, Esau is still a little bit heated about Jacob stealing his birthright and his inheritance and just running off with it, so to say. So here we go. They're bearing down on them, and Jacob, he's dividing the kids with the wives and the maids or whatever. So maybe that's a little bit of like a splitting everybody up type of thing, so that not everybody gets killed at once. It talked about in the previous chapter about splitting into two groups, and then maybe, you know, if one of the groups gets killed, then the other ones maybe they'll make it away and survive. So very dire circumstances. This is going to be very hard, very difficult. Genesis 33:2. And he put the maids and their children in front, Leah and her children after them, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. It almost looks like he's lining them up in his priorities. That the children of the maids are the least, followed by the maids themselves, then his first wife, the one that he didn't care for as much, and then his actual wife that he really loved. So I say actual, but they were all his wives, right? So I don't know. Polygamy? Not a good idea. When you think about like the lives of like these like maids or even Leah, right? Like here they are, they're in a relationship with this man, and then they've had kids by him, and he's not all that interested in them, and just that's their whole life, their whole corporeal existence, right? Going through that, like, yeah, I don't know. That sounds kind of depressing, but maybe it's not as bad as it is nowadays. Genesis 33:3. Then Jacob went over the stream before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Here we go. Jacob crosses the stream. He's bowing down 7 times, the number of completion, and his brother's approaching him. Genesis 33:4. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Jacob was expecting war. He was expecting conflict. You know, he's been away for a while, and he thought, you know, he wasn't really welcome into the land. But his brother comes up to him, gives him a nice hug, and they weep together. What a beautiful scene. Reunited after close to 30 years of being apart, so that's crazy. And it's always good when you're welcomed with open arms in an embrace than welcome with the blade of the sword. I think it's oftentimes that we make this fictitious thing in our head where we think that people are going to hold a grudge forever and that we'll never be welcome again, we can never go back, and then for whatever circumstance or whatever it is, maybe you reunite with someone that you've been separated from and they greet you in love and kindness rather than continuing on the strife or suffering or conflict from before, from an earlier time. You see a lot of kids or whatever that leave home under bad circumstances and are welcomed back. So this is a good thing. Genesis 33:5. Esau looked up and saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" And Jacob replied, "They are the children whom God has graciously given your servant." Jacob, the younger brother, he's been gone for a long time. And when he comes back with his family. And his older brother, he's meeting all these people for the first time. And it's kind of unfortunate because Jacob went and got married and multiple times and had all these kids, and his brother never got to experience the joy of being the good uncle, right? So here we go. They're all just kind of there now, and he's getting to meet him for the first time. And Jacob too, he's like, "Oh well, God has graciously given your servant." He keeps putting himself down to try not to, set Esau off, right? That he's putting himself in the position of the servant, that he's not there to overthrow him. He's just there to kind of dwell in the land. He's not looking to be the usurper, or at least is positioning himself in that direction, which is probably not a bad idea. I mean, yeah, it takes a little bit of humility to do that, but compared to death, it's quite cheap. Genesis 33:6. Then the maids came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. Maids are typically of a lower position, a lower standing, at least in this generation or time period. It's only really modern times where you probably wouldn't say that quite so much. So, they're probably, it's probably routine for them to bow down. They probably bow down whenever the wives, the legal wives came by, so to say. So that would be something that they would be much more used to, being themselves kind of the servants. But this next part here is interesting. Genesis 33:7. And Leah also with her children came near, and they bowed themselves. After them, Joseph and Rachel came near, and they bowed themselves. So that it was like the maids did it first. Well, I guess Jacob went first. Then the maids and the maids' children, and then you have Leah and Rachel coming. So it's like they all kind of followed suit, kind of bowing themselves before Esau, as to show a level of respect and that they weren't going to be wild and disobedient and causing trouble and mischief. Also, from what we've read, this wasn't something that was rehearsed, something that was planned out. It was kind of one group saw the next one and then just followed suit. So there's some nobility in that, right? It wasn't that the wives instinctively went to bow before Esau. It was that they saw the maids and they just kind of came along too. I don't know if it's necessary to make such a big point on that, but it is interesting, I guess. I don't know. Genesis 33:8. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company which I met?" And he said, "These are that I might find favor in the sight of my Lord." Again, Jacob is continuing to put himself down and to esteem Esau. Genesis 33:9. And Esau said, "I have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." So it is as if Jacob is making an offering to give all this stuff to Esau. We saw that before in the previous chapter when he was talking about having all these different animals, he-donkeys and she-goats and whatnot, that to make them an offering to Esau. And Esau's like, "I've got a lot already. I don't need this. Keep what you have for yourself." Genesis 33:10. But Jacob replied, "No, I beg of you. If now I have found favor in your sight, receive my gift that I am presenting. For truly to see your face is to me as if I had seen the face of God, and you have received me favorably." Jacob doesn't want to take no as an answer. He really wants to give this stuff, this possession, to his brother. He wants to make things right. There's been some bad blood over the years, and he left for a very long time, almost in exile, and he's coming back, and he wants things to be right again. And I think some of that is as a peace offering to kind of get stuff moving along again, that they can rebuild their relationship and the mistrust that occurred after he stole his inheritance and deceived their father and all this other stuff, right? So here we are now. Genesis 33:11. Accept, I beg of you, my blessing and gift that I have brought to you. For God has dealt graciously with me, and I have everything. And he kept urging him, and he accepted. So it looks like Jacob was persuasive enough, and he was blessed by God and used that as kind of the justification. And Esau eventually accepted it. Genesis 33:12. Then Esau said, let us get started on our journey, and I will go before you. Genesis 33:13. But Jacob replied, you know, my lord, that the children are tender and delicate and need gentle care, and the flocks and herds with young are of concern to me. For the men should overdrive them for a single day, the whole flocks would die. So we have Esau. He's ready to go back. He's kind of made his peace or whatever. He's ready to go back, and he's like, well, we'll lead the way. And it's like, yeah, you guys don't have anything with you. It's just you and your 400 men and minimal supplies. You can just be on leave immediately, whereas Jacob has his family with him and all their flocks, and it's like they can't keep up that pace, so they need to go slower or else things are going to die. The flocks are going to die, and it will be very hard on the children and the wives as well. So he needs a solution. Genesis 33:14. Let my Lord, I pray you, pass over before his servant, and I will lead on slowly, governed by consideration for the livestock that set the pace before me, and the endurance of the children until I come to my Lord in Seir. Sounds like a good solution to me. They'll make it at their own pace. But what's Esau going to say to this? Genesis 33:15. Then Esau said, let me now leave you with some of the people who are with me. But Jacob said, what need is there for it? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau wants to leave some of his guys behind to maybe come with them. Maybe they can help out or something. And Jacob's like, well, you don't really need that, so don't even worry about it. Of course, in much more flowery, dignified wording. Genesis 33:16. So Esau turned back that day on his way to Seir. So Esau's going to head back with his boys, and Jacob's on his own. Genesis 33:17. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths or places of shelter for his livestock, and named the place is called Succoth, meaning booths. So he's going to follow at his own pace, and he goes and makes like his own little city thing and builds up a house and shelter for his livestock. That doesn't really sound like he's making the journey. He's just kind of, I don't know what's going on here. It doesn't really sound like he said, he's like, oh, we'll follow behind, and it's like, what, they didn't even come? Like, what is this? I mean, it's one thing to go pitch a tent and maybe it takes multiple days or whatever, but to go build a house and make shelter for your livestock, that doesn't sound very temporary at all. Genesis 33:18. When Jacob came from Paddan Arma, he arrived safely and in peace in the town of Shechem, in the land of Canaan, and pitched his tents before the enclosed town. Okay, so maybe it wasn't super permanent. Looks like they're still moving on. I wonder if they just kind of built the house and the shelter, maybe rested there a few days. A little bit of a debriefing from the stress of thinking that they might get executed by Esau or some other terrible thing going on. And after having that confrontation, this was just kind of a way to kind of reset, rest up a bit before moving forward, letting the animals graze for a while, because you probably can't move that fast with all those animals, right? You can probably move for a couple days, and then they gotta rest for a while, kind of get situated, and then they can kind of keep going, right? Kind of a moving target type of thing. So now they've gotten closer and they got their tents kind of going on, which is kind of a good thing, I guess, because that's much more temporary. Like that wasn't a permanent thing that they just kind of went there. It was kind of walled off or whatever, so they're kind of tenting up outside of the city. Genesis 33:19. Then he bought the piece of land on which he had encamped from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money. Genesis 33:20. There he erected an altar and called it El Elhon Israel, God, the God of Israel. There we go. So he buys this land for 100 pieces of money, and then he builds an altar on it. So it looks like he's getting more and more situated, and he, of course, names the altar El Elon Israel, the God of Israel. So that's kind of cool. So he's getting more and more situated. He's moving into the land, and it looks like he's starting to use the name Israel a little bit more. I find it interesting that God renamed him from Jacob to Israel, but we still see him referred to as Jacob in this chapter, and I guess the last one as well. Whereas when Abraham was renamed, or Abram to Abraham, we saw that everywhere. That was just a consistent thing that Abram just was Abraham, and we saw that everywhere. Whereas with Jacob being renamed Israel, we don't quite see that as much. There might be something more to that, and we might see more of the name Israel as we move forward. But I just think that's kind of interesting. Jacob, he's like 90% of the way home. I want to see that last 10%, but we're at the end of the chapter, so we'll have to pick this up next time.